Hello, I'm Andrew Beaudry.
And I'm Ryan Cummings.
Welcome to Your Bread and Butter Podcast.
Today's episode is Now What? Your Financial World with the federal fiscal year 2026 budget in place.
We're all going to be impacted by it, but you know what? I'm concerned because our government is so broke, it can't even pay attention.
Pay attention.
See you in a moment.
Discussions in this show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a registered broker-dealer. Member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors Incorporated, a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Private Financial Design LLC are not affiliated.
Bread and butter.
Thank you for joining us to Your Bread and Butter Podcast. Today, we're going to be having a real conversation.
Today's episode is called Now What? Your Financial World with the federal fiscal year 2026 budget now in place.
Yep. Everybody is going to be affected by this, from the lowest tax bracket to the highest tax bracket, to business owners or career-oriented people. Everybody's going to be impacted by this bill that just passed through Congress.
Our goal today is to just give kind of the overview of this bill, some of the the high-level points on what are the biggest things that are going to affect the average American, some of the details to help you navigate what's actually true. Some articles out there sometimes gloss over these sorts of changes and tax law moves and sometimes even categorize them incorrectly. And so we're going to hopefully clear up some of that confusion.
Yes, today is not an all-encompassing, in-depth dive into all of this, but you should be aware of just some of the generics of it. And before you get too excited about it, we want to give a little preemptor to this. Any tax advice that you need based on any conversation we have that regards your retirement plans, 529s, estimated tax concerns personally, estate law tax, make sure you consult with your tax advisors to get full, real insight as to how it affects you. The really interesting thing about all this, and keep in mind, when you hear from a friend or you read something about, oh, that's going to impact me, just remember, there are caveats to some of these new things that are in place, like, for instance, as we get through it, like the senior tax deduction, this additional for over 65 to help offset Social Security. The problem with that is it's not available to everybody because it is income sensitive. So we're not going to cover all those details today, but be careful about getting too excited. There are business deductions. There's crypto regulations that are coming aboard here. So things are changing and developing. So we want to look at this. What are some of the teases that we're looking at today?
As you mentioned already, a few, but some others are even just personal tax cuts, different deductions, credits are going to be coming in, some new savings vehicles, like you said, crypto regulation. And we're hopefully going to wrap it all in after we discuss some of these things into how they might actually impact the market and what you can expect as the year progresses with this bill in place.
All right. And as we move forward, I know there are people out there that were very happy to see some of the changes that were made to our welfare system. So my question is, people are happy with all of the changes that have been done to our welfare system. I mean, it is a really legitimate question. What do you do with people who basically want to just live on government handouts and refuse to do any work? What do you do with them?
I don't know. What do you do with them?
You just don't elect them to Congress. You get rid of them. Yeah, that's what I think we should do. Anyway, let's move on to some real personal taxation here. By the way, we're wearing our dad joke shirts, so hey, it's serious, but you got to have some laughs.
You got to have some dad jokes.
Got to have some dad jokes in there. All right.
So one of the biggest overhauls through this recent tax bill is on the personal taxation side of things. There's a lot of other components too, businesses, crypto, and things of that nature that we'll get into. But even on the personal side, there's a lot of potential benefits and tax cuts that could benefit many Americans. Some of the big ones that maybe you've even already heard of are things like no tax on overtime pay, no tax on tips, and even a car loan interest deduction.
Yeah, and those are all great, but again, there's caps on them. So an overtime pay is $25,000 per couple at most, or $12,500 for an individual. Tips, it's up to $25,000, and for car loan interest, it's up to $10,000. But even those, based on your overall income, might be reduced.
Correct. And with all of these, like you said, overall income can reduce them. There's even limits for the tips. You have to be in certain industries. So you can't just be an accountant who claims a tip from one of your clients. It has to be a server, a waiter, a gas station attendant, any of the big industries where you're normally, tipped as a
Best
regular.
tip I ever got was look both ways before you cross the street. I still think that's a good tip. All right. Family and retirement accounts have changed here as well. There's a new feature, a new account out there called the Trump account. Basically, it's a $1,000 contribution for children born from 2024 through 2028, and expanded use of 529 plans with penalties still apply on improper use, but there is an expanded use of those, as well as an extra $6,000 standard deduction for seniors from 2025 to 2028. But there are some limitations to some of those things.
There are. Like you were saying earlier, if your income's too high, you might not qualify for certain things like the $6,000 additional standard deduction for seniors. Also, with those Trump savings accounts, as they're being called, there is some benefits to those. That $1,000 goes in there from the government. Parents can contribute up to $5,000 per year into those accounts. Not tax deductible, but that money can grow tax deferred, and if you use it for...
Well, it's tax-free, right? At the end.
If it's used for qualified expenses. That's the caveat.
Right.
It can't just be used on whatever you want, but if you use it on similar things to 529s, and I believe there's a few additional things like, it could be used for like startup costs for businesses or a home down payment even. So it's actually a little bit like an expanded 529 plan that can have some nice benefits over the long run.
Yeah, and maybe you could use it to buy some of those really expensive Bibles that were put out a few years ago. Anyway, this is only good through 2024 through 2028. So it's kind of a temporary type of thing, and it seems like it's a really cool idea, but the reality is it is only $1,000. You don't really get to choose your own investments. There's sort of an indexed option in there. So
yeah, I believe I was reading that they're restricting it to U.S. indexes too.
Right,
so
right.
No international.
So no international indexes in there. So be cautious. Talk to your financial advisor about it. If you don't have one, get one, please. So they're now going to permanently extend the lower marginal tax rates, mortgage interest deduction up to $750,000 cap. Explain a little bit about that one.
Yeah, so if you have a mortgage up to $750,000, you can write off the interest. So that was put in place back in 2017 with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It's just simply been written permanently into tax code now, where if you have that mortgage up to that $750,000 of indebtedness is the term they use. So meaning if you have $1 million mortgage, well, you can only write the interest off on the first $750,000.
Right.
But for anyone that level or lower, you can write off all that mortgage and continue to do so this year and moving forward. And then also they've done some little jumps with the standard deduction, $750 for a single filer, $1,500 for a married couple.
Added on to the previous.
Added on to the
amounts,
existing standard deduction. So now that's all, continued to be permanent going forward.
Yep.
And then the last one is the SALT deduction. That's the state and local tax deduction, along with property taxes. It's been capped at $10,000 for the last
4 years? No, more than
even
that.
longer. 6, 7, 8 years.
8 years.
Actually,
8 years. Yeah.
8 years since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It's now been extended to $40,000 at least until 2030. So that one's not permanent, but who knows what could change between.
And
now
that
and
mostly, affects a lot of us here in the Northeast who have, higher real estate tax rates. Not necessarily the mortgage rates, but the idea of $40,000 is far more palatable for those of us here in the Northeast, for sure.
It is, especially with people in higher state tax states as well. California, New York, even here in Massachusetts, where I live in Vermont, all on the higher side of the state tax spectrum. That now is no longer going to cap at that $10,000 combined with your property taxes. It's up to that $40,000, which is going to be a much larger deduction. And even one that's not on this list here is the increase to the child tax credit as well. And that's going from $2,000 to $2,200. But again, with all of these, even just like with the child tax credit, that SALT deduction, there's income limits. There's different ones for each one, so we're not going to go into the exact numbers. We'd be here all day. We're going to do a deeper dive, hopefully later this
on,
year.
yeah, right.
But there's income limits to all of these. So while these deductions sound nice on the surface, you may or may not qualify for each one of them depending on your overall income.
Well, that brings to mention, we're going to go up to this next one here. We're going to talk a little bit about it. You'll see the slide up there. But these are the estimated changes in federal tax income levels. You'll notice that for those people who make far less money, actually they get hurt the most. This is a little different than the previous 2017 tax cut that went through, where actually the lower portion of our tax code received a very healthy benefit at the bottom. This time, though, they're the ones getting punished. And if you look at that scale, just picking, somewhere around 60 to 80,000 a year, you're actually going to be paying about 4% less in tax. So if you get to the, 100,000 mark, it's still 4% less in tax per year. Now, this raises a question that we often bring up with our clients who are getting big refunds back from the federal government taxation program. So when you're getting that big refund back, you're actually giving them an interest-free loan, which is very gracious, but then you're getting back $3,000 or $4,000 a year where you could have been investing that yourself. So we want to propose for you, as you look at the next slide on here, you can see here the estimated savings by the income group using the $80,000 level, $3,200 less in taxes, approximately. So if you adjust your tax withholdings starting in January 2026 over the next 5 years, or 5 tax seasons, and it runs out to about $270 a month. If you took that $270 a month and you just had it invested at 5%, you would end up ending up with a much higher value. You'd end up with $18,000 plus. You'd have a gain of over a couple $1,000s of the $16,200 you put in there. So you'd actually have a pretty healthy gain. That would be a nice way to add to your savings. So rather than give it to the government and get back this big check with no return on your investment, keep it yourself and invest it.
Yeah, I think the point there just being is these deductions, there's a lot of people that may benefit from some of these additional deductions, and try to make the most of those benefits. Instead of just waiting for that big tax refund, invest it, analyze your tax withholdings, keep that money in your pocket throughout the year. And the more deductions you qualify for, the bigger that benefit can be, especially with investing that money. Now, speaking of deductions, with this new bill, I was hoping to be able to write off my dog as a tax
Loki?
deduction. Yes.
How could Loki be a deduction?
Well, I mean, he eats my food. He pays no rent. He takes up space on the couch. He sounds like a teenager to me. So I thought, why not? But,
you sure? Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, listen, you'll look good in pinstripes. I'll tell you that. Do they do pinstripes? No, orange jumpsuits now. That's what they do. Yeah. I'll tell Loki that you're going to bump him out. Well, listen, if you're a business owner and you're listening to us right now, we have good news for you. The pass-through entity deduction, which is the 20%, has been increased to 23%, and there's greater eligibility for small business owners based on how you are legally structured. Now, again, we're not getting into all the details, but definitely talk with your tax advisor about being set up correctly to take advantage of that. So if you have $100,000 that's, your net profit at the end of the year, you're going to have that $23,000 of no federal taxes. And as a business owner since 2017, we've used that to build our business, putting 78% of that money back into the business so that it actually has an impact. And that's true for most business owners that I talk to.
It's a big deal. I mean, that 20% deduction was huge back in 2017 when it was introduced, and being increased to 23%, just a little bit more to continue some of that business growth.
And it's great for small businesses.
It is. And now another feature that's kind of being paired with that was put in place back in 2018, but it was only around for just a few years, is bonus depreciation.
Yeah, bonus depreciation. Yeah.
That was eliminated, over the last few years. It's coming back again into the business realm. So that means if you have big expenses that you buy for your business. If you're a business owner that uses vehicles for work, or big pieces of machinery, or even just office supplies, they can be expensive. A lot of times you have to depreciate those over time.
10, 15, 20 years. Right.
No longer. Now, with this new law being introduced again, those new purchases, they can be depreciated immediately, offsetting your income in the exact tax year you bought those items and giving you a big tax deduction along the way.
As well, there's an expanded business interest deduction that goes part of this bill. So really, for business owners, reevaluate your entity structure and look at the strategic way that you could use that money to actually build and structure your business to be more effective, whether it's building it and being more cost effective, either way.
Right, because I think that is the goal of these write-offs, is not necessarily just to put more money back in the business owner's pockets, but while maybe doing a little bit of that, give you more money to invest and continue to grow and build.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. Now, this is going to affect the markets. There's no doubt about it. How it affects the markets, it's only Monday. I mean, we're recording this on a Monday, just after the bill's been signed. So we really don't know, but we do know a couple things. The market hates instability. And so, because we don't really know how this is all going to play out along with the tariffs, volatility is driven by policy uncertainty and speculation. And so just as a reminder, as you go through this process, particularly for those of you out there really excited about all the regulations, the new regulations for crypto, which needs to be done in order to legitimize it and bring it on board over the next decade or so. But remember, be careful that greed kills everything around it. And I think of the Lord of the Rings with the poor little goblin guy there that has to have the ring on, my precious,
Gollum.
Gollum, my precious. If you get greedy, it will turn everything dark around you. So just run away if you're starting to feel greedy and speculative.
And I think some of the key sentiments to be focusing on here with the potential impact on the market are things like inflation. There is some concern while, you see a lot of the articles maybe on the Republican side of things pointing out that this bill has a lot of positives, could help grow the economy, giving all these deductions. But when you look at the Democrat side of things, and I think there's truth to both sides.
Yes, right.
There's a lot of concern around increased spending, the tax deductions and their additional impact on inflation. That inflation, even though it's still been in a healthy realm over the last year or so, it seems to still be proving, and it's part of why the Fed's holding course on interest rates, to be a little sticky. And the Fed has some concerns with it. And this bill, along with some tariff action and global trade talks, a lot of those things are kind of causing some concern around inflation and what impact will that have on the economy. So while the bill itself might help grow the economy, there might be some truth there. If it brings rampant inflation back with it, that's not going to be a good sign.
That hurts everybody. And just so you're out there, you're an investor, and we talk a lot about this, and it's how do you handle this and not lose sight. I mean, first of all, you got to keep the long-term perspective in hand here and run away from speculative strategies, just trying to make quick money or that kind of thing. You have to have a long-term strategy and get away from speculation. You want to take some small portion of your investments and speculate with it, well, that's fine. But again, get good advice about it. Just remember, long-term is actually where you're going to end up when you are alive. If you're dead, it won't matter.
True. That is true. And that's, like you said, speculative investments, they have their place, but it's a small piece of the portfolio. But, I think one of the more speculative investments that we did see a lot of reform here, it's kind of slowly starting to maybe get less and less speculative.
Correct.
Is the crypto space.
Right.
We did see a lot of regulation come in part of this bill, kind of hand in hand, to actually begin to create a framework to regulate a lot of primarily the stablecoin environment in the crypto realm.
Yeah, and I think, again, there's going to be a place here, and I've been making the prediction for a little while now. I think within the next 20 years, we won't have paper currency. I do think everything's going to be digitized for a lot of different reasons. But the truth is, this legislation it is a good step to put some parameters around it. It affects banks, credit unions, federally licensed non-banks, state chartered issuers that are underneath $10 billion in capitalization. And there is a way for this to actually work within the system. But there's other exclusions as well.
Yeah, there's some key requirements the government's starting to add for these institutions that you just mentioned. If they do want to start utilizing crypto, one is a backing system. They have to have a one-to-one reserve banking system where they're backing any crypto holdings with other liquid assets.
Liquid assets, right.
And so that's a key component to turning, what was once thought of as a incredibly speculative investment to begin kind of shifting that tide into something that maybe can be a little more reliable, a little more regulated. And I know maybe the big fans of crypto are going to be displeased with some of that, because that's that is some of the allure of crypto, is the deregulation and whatnot. But there's, to make it a larger, more adaptable investment, it's a tide that has to happen, a change that has to happen.
And I think the monthly disclosures and the annual audits that are being put into the system will greatly protect the average investor. And again, they're working on banning, the misleading marketing about federal insurance and any of these products, particularly for that, and as well as stricter anti-money laundering and sanctions compliance with oversight by the proper authorities and the state regulators to oversee this. This is a really big step.
Yeah. So a lot of these firms, they're going to have to prepare for, increased licensing, audits, product delays, all to meet these new rules, to be able to bring it up to standards. So that way there's less risk, and there's less crime, and less of the, hiding of assets that's been commonly associated in the crypto realm.
Correct. And it's really one of those things where, yes, it's becoming part of it. I refer to this a lot as the wild, wild west of the financial world, because that's pretty much what it is. And yes, and anytime you're in a pioneering environment where you have a whole new world developing, this is what's happening. We do need some structure to protect the average investor. Right. I know there are financial companies out there that are really promoting it and saying things like, you got to have 40% of your retirement assets in crypto.
That was a wild article.
That's a wild article.
I don't think we're quite there.
No. I think you should have at most. Well, I won't even get into that suggestion. But the idea here that 40% of that should be in crypto, no, that's just too risky.
Right.
So you got to be careful, and there's going to be a whole new change in that program. Now, there are some cuts to the social safety net programs that are in place. And this is for all of you out there that might have friends or relatives, or just to make yourself aware of what the politicians have done here. Now, I just want you to know that we actually don't approve of political jokes, and the reason for that is that we've seen too many of them get elected. So we're going to cover this for your awareness. And you might think, well, but that doesn't involve me. Yeah, but it might involve your neighbor. It might involve people that you do care about, or maybe people you should care about. So let's talk a little bit about some of the cuts to the social safety net programs.
Yeah, some things like Medicaid and food stamps, the SNAP program. A lot of the funding is facing some reductions to it. Now, there's, again, two frames of looking at these cuts. From the Republican side, it's a lot of, there's waste going on. There's people who are on these programs that were maybe meant to be temporary programs that have been on them indefinitely and are using up this money that may better be suited for individuals who need it. Now, there's the Democrat side that a lot of the restrictions here could potentially actually affect people that do need it and who are maybe unfairly getting removed from these programs when they really do benefit and can maybe cause some damage to a lot of individuals. And again, I think there's truth to both sides, because one of the big restrictions that was put in place in this is it's not so much that they're cutting spending, which is kind of the common thing that's being thrown around with this part of the bill. It's really more that they're putting these extra layers and restrictions on where this money is actually spent.
Yeah, somebody who's an able-bodied adult from age 19 to 64 that is in Medicaid, with the states working with them, if they're able-bodied, then they must work volunteer or be studying 80 hours a month at least to be on these programs. Yeah, even part-time. Parents of children 14 and plus are included in this. So there are some rational, real reasons to support something where if you have people that are able to work, but they're just gaming the system, as we would call it, well, there needs to be some type of way that we get that addressed.
Right.
On the other hand, there are going to be people that get mistakenly caught in that. And that's where we really, as being aware, as citizenry, if we know of somebody like that, maybe we can advocate for them. Like if they really do need the help, let's get in, let's pitch in and help our neighbors out to do that. But I do think, eligibility for federal benefits is narrowed for non-citizens with new restrictions and applications for programs like asylum, work permits, and humanitarian parole. The idea of this humanitarian parole, and along with these other ones, are to give people some time. And I get that. But when it's being used and overused and abused, then that's the part that's bad. And just to turn the other cheek or turn your eyes away from it and ignore it is not solving the issue.
Correct. And, while I do agree that there's potentially some big benefit there to try to add some of these restrictions in place, I was reading an article on some of the clarification of some of those restrictions and some of the things that I think did prove a little bit, maybe they're going to be a little bit difficult and could catch some of those people is there's going to be an increase in the notifying of and reapplying for these benefits.
Right.
And so individuals who maybe are don't have a steady income, but are gig work individuals, they're doing, under the table jobs, and maybe not necessarily under the table, but they're, odd jobs here and there, and their income is sporadic, or even potentially people that are trying to start a business for themselves and have maybe some months that are really good and others that are not. They're going to be increasing the workload on a lot of state departments to refile these individuals on a semi-annual basis.
Wow.
Rather than, I believe in the past, it was once every 2 years, and it was biannual. Now it's going to be semi-annual. So we're talking. So
for all the people that DOGE just got rid of, the states are going to have to hire
exactly.
to get
Exactly. So it's this vicious cycle.
If you're looking for a job. Right. Well, I think the next thing they addressed here is border security and defense spending, and that's part of this. I mean, $350 billion allocated for border and national security. You don't have to agree with all this, but we do know that the borders were fairly porous down in our south region. I don't know that any of our Canadian neighbors were really that porous or that bad of people coming in. But I do think that in Mexico this has been a real thing. So $46 billion for the border wall in Mexico, $45 billion for detention beds, funding for the largest deportation campaign in U.S. history, and they hired 10,000 new immigration and customs enforcement agents. So there's been a lot of money spent on our border security, and hopefully there will be something for that. Obviously, there's been a real slowdown in the illegal aliens coming in. We can't get into all the politics of all that, but we know that there's money being spent there. So there's going to be jobs created because of that. How long would that last? I have no idea, but it is part of this spending bill.
And I think that is, without getting too far down this rabbit hole today, I think it's something we'll probably talk more in our follow-up episode to this, but the spending is a concern, and that is one of those big portions of the bill that is one of the bigger increases to spending. There are some cuts, but there are some increases too, this being one of them, and it's going to be down the road an interesting thing to see how it affects the overall deficit and where things go from there. But again, we'll dive more into that in the episode later this year.
Yeah, and I think the biggest item that we have in front of us are people that depend on some of the immigrants who are working here legally, getting caught up in some of these deportation programs. Right. Hopefully that will recede and that will stop, and that people who are really, truly here illegally, those people will be addressed and taken care of, whether they're criminals or not. But we do have a process that people can be involved in. The part that we don't want to see is somebody who's legally working through the process and has all their stuff in order, and all of a sudden they can't work anymore. Right. So that would be unhealthy.
Right.
So let's conclude here today. We just want you to know there is money to save and there's money to be made, but you have to act with strategy.
That's the key point today. With all those deductions, these changes we're seeing, they're both for investors and for business owners. And now's the time to review your financial strategy and see if there's any changes that need to be made. We want to be able to expect market volatility, stocks, bonds, global trade, all these things. We're likely to see some volatility with the policy changes and with all these changes to the overall 2026
And even when
budget.
there's volatility, all of you need to know, look, at volatility is a part of a natural growing economy. Okay? So you're going to have the ups and the downs. And the truth is, volatility does not mean negativity. It just means you got to have a plan and keep invested through it. Don't try to time the market and try to be smarter than everybody else out there. The truth is that there's all kinds of terror threats going on. We don't know how that's all going to work out. Revisit, as your business owner, revisit your operations, your tax planning. See if you can qualify for that 23% federal tax pass-through for your business to get that money tax-free, put it back into your business. So these are important things to protect your economy.
And I think all in all, don't let TikTok or Instagram or your neighbor Joe be your financial advisor. Talk to a professional. I think we've dealt with this a lot recently. People hearing, hearsay here and rumors of this and rumors of that.
Didn't you have that happen just the other day?
Just recently, yes. And it's just
tell people what that was. That was
it was just it was a simple conversation about Social Security and discussing a spouse's eligibility for a spousal benefit. And this client was told that their spouse could get it regardless of whether they were collecting. Well, if you know anything about Social Security, that's simply not true. You, the primary earner, has to be collecting your benefit in order for your spouse to receive the spousal. I was able to show them an article directly from Social Security's website to illustrate just that. But it's, a dangerous thing of you have a friend or, like I said, someone on social media that's saying something so convincingly that it seems true and it may not be. So seek your advice from professionals. Don't necessarily believe everything that you hear.
It is so true. I watch sometimes, I see some of these things on Instagram and TikTok, and I just shake my head. I'm like, oh my goodness, that's just the worst possible advice. Well, listen, thank you for listening today. We're really glad you joined us. Just remember, live for today, for the tomorrow that's in your heart.
Because you'll never have more time to plan for tomorrow than you do today.
I'm Andrew Beaudry.
And I'm Ryan Cummings.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Bread and butter.